Moving on now to Giotto, otherwise known as the father of the Renaissance painting. We're going to look at his method and his works of fresco painting, and in particular his work that is in the Arena Chapel in Padua. So we need to talk a little bit about fresco painting. What is a fresco painting and the technique of fresco painting? It's important to know this because very often the artists we will be talking about and learning about as we go through right up to the High Renaissance will have painted frescoes. And as you know, in an exam question, there's nearly always a section on the technique. So it's important to know the technique of fresco painting and to understand exactly what it is. I draw your attention there to a video which I've highlighted in red. There's a video link there on YouTube, Fresco Making Techniques. Please watch that. Again, as always, there's additional information in that. And when you've that watched, come back here to the notes again. So I'm going to read down through them. The fresco means painting on plaster. Fresco is the Italian word for fresh. There are two fresco techniques, buon fresco and fresco secco. So buon fresco means painting quickly on a thin layer of damp, freshly laid plaster. Only pure pigments, they mean powdered paint or colours, mixed with water are used. As the plaster dries, the paint becomes a permanent part of the wall and does not flake off. Only small sections of this damp plaster of the fresco is painted in a day when using the buon fresco style, and we know already from looking at Masaccio that this section of work is called a giornata. Buon fresco is regarded as the true fresco technique. Fresco secco, however, means painting on dry plaster, with the paint mixture consisting of pigments mixed with water and egg or glue. The advantage of the fresco secco is the artist can paint more slowly because the paint isn't being absorbed into the plaster so quickly because the plaster is already dry. The disadvantage is the paint does not become part of the wall and therefore does not weather or stand the test of time as well, and will eventually flake off. Now you'll see when we actually go on to look at Giotto's frescoes, there are areas, particularly the blue areas, which have flaked off and have deteriorated. Quite often, I've spoken about this before, different minerals and plants were used to make pigments, the colours that the artist needed. Lapis lazuli, as you can see it here on the right hand side, is a blue stone which is found only in the mountains in what we call now modern day Afghanistan. In those days it was difficult to get. It's still expensive. It's an expensive stone. They used to ground it down to a fine powder and mix it with water, and it was used for the blues, the azure blue, or the aquamarine coloured blues in the frescoes. It was very expensive. They tended to paint the blue areas fresco secco on dry plaster because it absorbed less of the blue pigment, and therefore they didn't use as much of the lapis lazuli. And that's why very often we'll see in the frescoes that it's the blue that is flaked off because it wasn't painted buon fresco, it was painted fresco secco. To begin with, we're looking at the fresco The Lament for Christ by Giotto di Bondone in the Arena Chapel in Padua. And Giotto is most well known for these fresco works in the Arena Chapel in Padua. I suppose what you have to try and bear in mind is that when we look at these, we think, yeah, these are very well painted. He was a talented artist. What we don't realise and what we have to remember is nobody had seen any work like this. I mean, the use of Giotto's use of perspective, his facial expressions, the depiction of the grief of the angels, the emotion, the fact even that he had two figures with their back to us. Again, they are all unprecedented, had not been seen before. People were blown away by this. They had just never seen anything like it. Now, obviously going forward then, those techniques and the style of Giotto was taken on by other artists, and they improved it, and so on and so forth. And really, that's why we paint the way we do today. Is thanks really to Giotto starting it all off. Giotto is perhaps best known for the frescoes he painted in the Arena or Scrovegni chapel. They were commissioned by a wealthy man named Enrico Scrovegni, the son of a well-known banker and a banker himself. According to the church, usury, which means charging interest for a loan, was a sin. And so perhaps one of Enrico's motivations for building this chapel and having it decorated by Giotto was to atone for his sins of usury. The chapel is better known as the Arena Chapel, since it is on the site of an ancient Roman arena or an amphitheatre that later became the property of the Scrovegni family, and they built a palace on it. The palace was subsequently torn down in the 19th century. Giotto was commissioned to decorate or paint the interior of the chapel with frescoed scenes from the life of Christ, including the Lament for Christ, which is the one we're looking at here, and also another one called the Kiss of Judas. Now, you'll see the link there to the video on Khan Academy, to Giotto and to Giotto in the Scrovegni Chapel, his frescoes. There are 4 parts to this video. The one I have linked here is part 1. They are excellent, and please watch them. And you can return then here to reinforce your learning really with the typed notes here. Also, again, do check out what's in your textbook, because it will be pretty much the same as this, but there might be something that's a little bit different. So the subject matter of the painting, of the fresco, we know it's buon fresco. Giotto depicted the scene from the Bible where Jesus is taken down from the cross and presented to his mother Mary. Dramatic foreshortening, individual gestures and facial expressions give the characters a human quality. They are surrounded by other distraught mourners. Mary cradles her son, angels above cry in grief, and 2 of the mourners have their back to us. So when you look at the painting, you can see the people who have halos are Christ and the Mother, Saint Peter, and some of the other saints. We have Mary Magdalene there as well. The ordinary people don't have any golden halos. All the angels have halos. Composition of the fresco. The composition brings the eye to Mary and the lifeless figure of Jesus. The background shows a realistic scene with the lifeless tree and evidence of the use of some perspective. And don't forget, it was a very short time before this that it was plain gold backgrounds. There were no backgrounds. Certainly nothing with a landscape like this had been seen prior to this. The ridge of rock, which runs across the back of the painting, brings our eyes straight down to the central figures, Mary and Jesus. The open composition invites us to be part of the scene. Style. There is great variation in facial portrayal from profile to 3/4 view. So what do they mean? What do I mean by that? There's lots of different people are being seen in different ways. There's 3/4 view portraits, there's full frontal, there's side, and again, as I said, there's the back. The same style of face is portrayed for different people with short, long, curly hair, varying in colour to create variety within the group. This is a wonderful variation in his usage of hand gestures here in this Giotto. St. John with his arms flung back in horror, depicting emotion, and the angels in the sky with their hands to their faces, weeping large tears representing distress. Finally, the clasped hands and mournful posture of the other mourners invite us to become one with the theme of sorrow. I mean, there's no question, looking at it is a very sorrowful painting. And Giotto, when he does come up, very often there'll be The question will be partly, how did he depict emotion? What were the changes? What were the techniques did Giotto use to portray emotion in his paintings? Sometimes is a question that likens it to a stage set, that we almost feel like we're part of it. So several of these pages are included throughout the notes, as you'll see as we go along. And really they're just as an aid to help you when you're doing your sketches. It just simplifies the painting into a line drawing, and it might be of some use when you are learning to do the sketches that you'll have to do when you're doing the answers. The second fresco by Giotto we're going to look at is called The Betrayal of Christ, or The Kiss of Judas. So the subject matter, Giotto depicts the scene from the Bible where Jesus is betrayed by Judas with a kiss. It is a tense and dramatic scene which depicts the contrast between good and evil. Herod's army is evident by the confusion of spears and weapons in the background. Composition. As Judas reaches to embrace Jesus with his yellow cloak, forms a semicircle which brings our eye directly to the centre of the painting and to the expression of both the figures, Jesus and Judas. The calm, serene expression of the face of Jesus is in direct contrast to the evil and repellent face of Judas. The style. Giotto created an illusion of space. Giotto portrayed real people in real settings. We know this again, we've said this before. This type of work had not been seen before. This style of painting had not been seen before. He used correct proportions and used foreshortening. He conveyed emotions through facial expression and through hand gestures. He developed new fresco painting. He also developed new fresco painting techniques. And I'll ask you again to make sure you watch all 4 parts of the Khan Academy videos, because they cover all of these frescoes that we're talking about here. The last fresco we're going to look at is called The Flight into Egypt. The subject matter is the Holy Family. Christ, Mary and Joseph and an angel are depicted with golden halos. The subject matter was when Herod threatened to, or didn't threaten, but in actual fact did kill all newborn baby boys, because he heard that a great ruler had been born, and he was trying to make sure that he wasn't overtaken by this ruler. He was threatened by him, so he killed all the baby boys. An angel came and told Joseph and Mary about this, and they escaped to Egypt to safety. So we can see here again we have this feeling of an open composition. Mary and Christ in the centre, they're framed by the rock behind us. We also have again the beginning to see the start of the use of linear and aerial perspective. Interestingly enough, I didn't say it on the other slides, but I need to just add it in here. No shadows, no cast shadows. When we look at these figures, when we look, we'll say, on the ground underneath the donkey or underneath the people, and it's the same for the previous two. It's also the same for the betrayal of Christ and the lament for Jesus, that there's no shadows on the ground. It hadn't been discovered yet that you would paint shadows underneath something to show that they were 3-dimensional. That will come a little bit later on. Well, not that later on, a good 100 years later almost. But just for now, it's to be noted that Giotto, it's because it was a technique that they hadn't been discovered. And that really is the end of Giotto. You'll see this on the very last slide. There is a question, an exam question, and the marking scheme. And we'll just take a quick look at that now. So this question is from 2014, and Giotto is an artist that comes up very often in the exam. in the Leaving Cert Art History exam, both higher and ordinary level, because of his significance to the development of painting and art. This is question 9. Giotto created an illusion of depth on a flat surface and portrayed dramatic events as if they were happening on a stage. Discuss this statement with reference to a named work by Giotto, commenting on the subject matter, composition, style, and the techniques used in his work. And then the part B of the question, name and briefly discuss one other work by the artist. So you're entirely up to yourself which works of Giotto you choose, but all of them were sufficient. All of them would be a good choice. For the discussion of the statement, you get 10 marks. For the discussion of the named work, you get 5 for naming the work, and you get 10 for the discussion. The discussion must include the subject matter, the composition, the style, and the techniques used in his work. And don't forget, when you're answering a question on technique, you need to describe the technique of fresco making. Part C, brief discussion of the other named work. So, 5 for name and 5 for discussion. I don't know why they always say brief discussion of the other named work, when in actual fact the same marks are allocated to it. So don't make it that brief. Keep it fairly detailed. And for the sketches, you're going to get 10 marks. And as always, sketches must be annotated and must be included. So that's Giotto really finished. And we will move on then to early Renaissance sculpture.